Hello, I'm Claire Kelly and I'm Director of Curricula and Training at Mindfulness in Schools Project, which is a UK charity, although we also work internationally. But today I'm here really to share the journey that we've been on. We've been around for over 10 years and we've learnt a lot. And my hope is that some of our learning might be useful for you too, whatever area you're working in. So my talk really is about the lessons we've learnt, if you like, forgive the pun, from 10 years of principles and pragmatism. So let's just begin with how this all began. So back in 2009, at a conference, a wonderful woman called Felicia Huppert was speaking about mindfulness, this relatively new thing that people were talking about in the UK. And she mentioned towards the end of her talk, what would mindfulness look like in a schools-based context? And she set a challenge. She said, is anybody here who wants to come and talk about this? And if so, come and see me afterwards. And there were indeed 3 people attending that conference who were very interested. All of them at the time classroom teachers, all of them long-term mindfulness practitioners. So Richard Burnett, Chris Cullen and Chris O'Neill got together, went to talk to Felicia, and from that moment on, Mindfulness in Schools Project was born. You might notice the demographic here is very male and very white at this stage, but it does get a little bit more diverse as we go forward. So from that point on, Richard in particular really started to pull through threads of ideas about what this thing would look like. And at the time, he was also writing a master's study, a dissertation in Buddhist studies. And some of the reading he was doing was from a book called The Psychology of Awakening. And in it, he found this great little passage which John Kabat-Zinn described his experience of trying to take this thing called mindfulness and adapt it to the setting he was working in at the time. So as you see here, he talks about a flash, this kind of moment of insight that he had on a retreat back in 1979. And he said the flash had to do with the question of how to take the heart of something as meaningful, as sacred, if you will, as the Buddha Dharma, and bring it into a world in a way that doesn't dilute, profane or distort it, but at the same time is not locked into a culturally and tradition-bound framework that would make it absolutely impenetrable to the vast majority of people who nevertheless are suffering and who might find it extraordinarily useful and liberative. And you might also be able to see here a little comment in on the edge there, which is actually Richard Burnett's handwriting in his own copy of this book, which says, this is exactly what I want to do in schools. So that real sense of keeping hold of all the scaffolding and millennia of learning that there is within mindfulness traditions, and yet making it accessible in a schools context. So what does that look like? Because frankly, it's a bit different to perhaps anybody who's done some mindfulness within an adult context, maybe an 8-week course or been on retreat. So what we're looking at here is the cold reality of young people, whether it's in primary or secondary schools, and all that brings with it, as well as the staff who are potentially going to be teaching this stuff. So when people come and train with us, one of the first things we started doing was actually challenging them. What is this actually going to look like? Are you expecting your students to float into your classroom and just be going, oh, teacher, teach me the way, for I wish to learn? And if so, I think you're going to have a bit of a shock. So when we're looking at mindfulness in schools or youth-based contexts, because we also work outside of the school system, you're looking at people who are not volunteers. They're going to be in classes they've been told they've got to attend more often than not. So what's that like compared to an adult who's maybe chosen to be there? How is it to be a teacher of mindfulness and also hold a classroom of as many as 30 students? Because this is what Richard was working with, along with the 2 Chris's. Let's assume, worst case scenario, wet Tuesday morning, just before lunch, and you've got 30 young people in that room, maybe 14 to 15-year-olds, let's get really risky. what's that going to be like? How are you going to hold them as a group and still communicate the essence of mindfulness practice and theory? How are you going to guide practices when given, someone at the back of the room may be poking their friend or giggling or staring out of the window or texting under the table or all those other lovely things they might be doing? How do you guide inquiry in a way that's safe? So those young people aren't going to go their separate ways at the end of the session. They're potentially going to spend the rest of the day, week, month, year with that same group of people. So how do we allow them to share their learning whilst also managing to keep themselves safe, not leaving them vulnerable in any way? And much less contact time. If you're lucky in a school, you'll get 30 to 40 minutes to spend with these young people once a week. That's the average. So how is that going to be? And then most importantly, we've discovered, how do you get the staff on board? How do you inform them about what you're doing and maybe encourage them to get involved? So from that and those key intentions, it was clear that we had to start with the staff. And rather than perhaps traditionally is the case, with education and teachers, where you go and you learn something, you teach it once, and then maybe you share it with your colleagues. It's called cascading. That's what we call it in the UK. Here, what we wanted them to do is actually learn it from the inside out. So learn mindfulness for their own well-being, for their own understanding. Then, before they even begin to teach young people mindfulness, explore what it's like to teach mindfully. So what does a mindful assembly look like? What does a mindful maths lesson look like? What does a mindful registration period look like? Begin to explore how it informs your teaching more broadly. And then, if you're ready and you want to, learn to teach mindfulness to these young people, but in a very particular way. So what does this look like? So the journey we've been on is one where there have been lots of developments over the years, starting in 2011. Where something called .B was developed, and it's a programme for 11 to 18-year-olds. And if you look at the content, it's very similar to an adult mindfulness course. All the scaffolding is there in terms of the key learning about what it is, what the mind is, how it works, training attention, and then beginning to develop a relationship with it that can help relieve suffering, can build a sense of well-being or even flourishing. So that underlines the whole programme. And .B has evolved quite a lot over the years. At this point, we found that most people who are coming to train to teach this stuff, which is a 4-day training course, having already learnt mindfulness for your own well-being, so 8-week programme minimum, then coming to learn to teach .B. Very early on, it was mainly adult mindfulness teachers who wanted to train, and because they thought, well, it would be a lovely way to develop skills, go from teaching adults into a classroom. And one of the key learning points there was that actually being a good adult mindfulness teacher doesn't necessarily mean you're going to ace it as a mindfulness teacher with young people. It's a slightly different skill set. No, it's a very different skill set. And if you can't hold a group of young people and manage them in a way that feels kind of safe and supportive, but also, you can do the stare of death to the person poking their friend at the back of the room, you're going to struggle. So that was a really important learning point from early on. In 2013, then came Pawsby, which is the curriculum we have for 7 to 11-year-olds. 2014, we decided, kind of going backwards a bit, that probably what would be really helpful is a programme, an 8-week programme for school staff that doesn't require them to go somewhere else to do it. And what's more, it kind of builds into their language, similar language, to the language that the younger people are learning through doing .B or Pawsby. So from that point, we developed something called the .B Foundations course. So 8 weeks for staff wellbeing, learning mindfulness for their own wellbeing. And then in 2017, we wanted to bring in something that would help to sustain mindfulness in schools. So rather than people just dropping in and teaching .B or Pawsby, having someone on the staff team who can lead the programme, keep it powering on. It's a really lonely business being a mindfulness teacher in any context if you're on your own. So the idea here is that you're trained and given the resources you need to really start to embed mindfulness in your school, and also train up those people who've already done all of this other training to teach their colleagues the .B Foundations programme. So you're constantly having input in the school in terms of people understanding what mindfulness is and what it isn't. In 2018, we took that .B Foundations programme online, but live, to increase accessibility, because we realised quite a few people couldn't access it. Some schools are too small or didn't have the resources or the time within their schedule to teach this stuff every year. So .Begin was something online that allowed people to access it from home in the evenings. And then .Breathe. So this came out of a research project we were asked to take part in. And it was quite a departure for us, because it's actually a one-day training aimed at the transition years of 9 to 14-year-olds who we know are very vulnerable in terms of depression and a whole host of other issues. So .Breathe is actually just 4 lessons that someone can learn to teach in one day. But with a real sense of understanding the mindfulness, a bit of social and emotional learning, and kind of a bit of neuroscience as well. And then in 2020, just about to launch as I do this talk, is DOTS, which is our curriculum for 3 to 6-year-olds. Kind of the missing link, really, in everything else that we've been doing. But also what's really exciting is that next year we're developing something called the School Mindfulness Pathway, which holds the hand of anybody who wants to bring mindfulness into their school right from the outset. So giving them suggestions on what's worked, case studies of other people who've made it work really well, resources to help to kind of share with other people, whether it's the school community, their colleagues, senior leadership. And they work their way through this pathway, eventually with a hope that they may be able to get to a stage where they have sustainable, accessible mindfulness input, potentially across their school and within the school staff team. So exciting times for us. Also, what's proved really important is the extent to which we rely on the community who are teaching this. And this community has built and built. So we're now, we've trained about 6,000 teachers to deliver our various curricula in schools or youth-based contexts. That means about 618,000 students have had some kind of input in terms of mindfulness in their school. And what we're now noticing, and especially since we've been teaching online, is that the global community of teachers is growing as well. And you can see here, these are all the countries where we've got teachers who've trained to deliver some form of curricula that we've been offering. So that's a wonderful move for us in terms of just getting a global community going. And then also the evidence base. So it's so important to have evidence. There's no point in saying, this is really great and people like it, if there's no solid evidence to back up what you're saying. So we're very lucky in that we've had people interested in carrying out research around our curricula. Some key studies included the randomised control feasibility study that happened in 2013 using .B. Key findings around the benefits of mindfulness in terms of well-being, in terms of stress, and depressive symptoms in young people. Then Pawsby, there was a great study by Wimmer and Dorji that was really looking at the effects of the Pawsby curriculum for primary school students on brain structure and function. Again, with relation to inhibition, emotion regulation. Our .B Foundations programme was explored in 2016, looking at the ways in which an adapted course for school staff wellbeing could benefit them. And again, seeing some really positive outcomes there in terms of stress, wellbeing, mindfulness, self-compassion. And if you want a really fantastic summary of the kind of evidence that's out there according to specific themes, then I'd really recommend this document as well. Katherine Weare, Felicia Huppert, 2 key players in the world of mindfulness and education. And that can be accessed online, or you can access it via our website. So just a little word about our website. We do train people, but we also want to be a resource, a kind of resource for the community. So if you visit the website, you'll see there's loads of information on there that's freely and publicly accessible, including research studies around mindfulness in young people, school staff, in different contexts. We've got case studies of how it's worked. There's about 30 there now, looking at different contexts, different types of settings. We've got our own impact data on how students and teachers respond to the courses that they've been given. and some suggested publications. So do use the website as a resource. Whether or not you want to do anything with us, we'd love you to just have a look and use it. And finally, a big piece of research that's due out any moment now is called Myriad. If you want to know more about Myriad, a massive, large-scale study with different strands to it, supported by the Wellcome Trust. And it is included in that is the largest ever randomised controlled trial involving young people and mindfulness to date. So about 9,000 young people involved, about 250 teachers who train to teach.be. And it's looking at how various aspects of how that plays out in terms of mental health and well-being, both for the staff and the students. So do look that up. They've got their own website. So just kind of coming to the end here, I just want to also point out at this stage that despite everything that we've done and the scale that we work at, there are only 9 of us. 3 of us are full-time, 6 of us are part-time. This is it. This is us, the Mindfulness in Schools project team. And I guess I'm showing that to you so that you get a sense of what's possible, no matter how few people you have involved. What's made it possible is the community that we've been working with, the teachers on the ground, the researchers and the scientists who are interested in supporting our work by carrying out research. It's so important to have a sense of community, and that community is growing all the time, especially since we've moved online for our training in response to the pandemic. So exciting times. You'll see all kinds of things on the internet around the work that's been going on, both in terms of just sharing ideas about mindfulness in schools projects. So Richard Burnett has done a TED talk on what it was like to set up mindfulness in schools. John Kabat-Zinn has become very involved in the work we do. He's one of our patrons. He spoke at our conference twice, actually, in 2018 and 2013. And actually, at the end of the 2013 conference, he went straight from our conference to number 10 Downing Street, so where the Prime Minister of the time, David Cameron, was based, to talk to this lovely group of people who helped set up the Mindfulness Initiative, which looks at the ways in which mindfulness can play into 4 key areas. So the health system, criminal justice system, the workplace and education. So we're part of the steering committee on the education strand of that. And there's a really fantastic document, the Strategy for Mindfulness in Education, which has come out very recently, which is well worth looking at if you're interested in the work that's going on within the Mindfulness Initiative and the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Mindfulness. So what have we learned? Just to summarise, what's really important is a clear sense of intention. What are your intentions? There's a phrase that's often used within the mindfulness community, which is everything rests on the tip of intention. Keeping a sense of what your intentions are is so key. And for us, it was just to bring mindfulness to young people and those who work with them or care for them. And we just keep going back to that. The importance of community and the importance of listening to what they need. So we've constantly adapted what we do in response to feedback we've had from stakeholders, practitioners, experts in the field, scientists, everybody. The importance of piloting and having critical friends who'll go, well, it doesn't work so well for me. And what's come out of that most recently is some support groups and inclusion groups where we're exploring what we do in relation to the broader community, in relation to specific groups, specific communities, and sharing learning across all of those areas. Research, I've already said, so incredibly important. There's no point in doing this if actually there's no evidence that it does any good. And adaptability. So we've had to change big time. For years, we refused to run training online. We thought nothing would be better than being in the same room with people. And of course, that's not possible now. So we do run training online and we've learnt a lot and it works well. There are benefits and then there are costs, but actually we're still training. And in a funny sort of way, we're extending our community through doing that. More international people are joining us and that's really exciting. So there we are. That's 10 years of principles and pragmatism in a very short period of time. But I hope it's useful. And as I say, use us as a resource. Visit the website, ask us questions, contact us through inquiries. We're really happy to share our learning, share resources. And if we don't have the resources that you need, I'm sure we can find them for you. So thanks very much.